The glass beads clicked softly against the wooden table as Olivia Dawson threaded each one onto the worn leather cord, her fingers moving with the practiced precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Yet her heart still trembled with every bead that passed through her hands, because each one represented a memory of her mother that she refused to let fade into the Montana dust. It was the spring of 1874, and the small mercantile shop in Montana City, where Olivia worked, allowed her these quiet moments between customers when she could sit by the window and work on her beading. The afternoon sun cast golden light across the trading post floor, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits. Her mother had taught her this craft when she was just a girl, back when life seemed simpler and death was something that happened to other families in distant places. But consumption had taken her mother 6 months ago, stealing her away in the middle of winter when the snow piled so high against their cabin that Olivia could barely dig a path to the outhouse. Now, at 23 years old, Olivia found herself alone in the world except for the strings of beads she made, each one a prayer, each one a promise that she would not forget the woman who had raised her with nothing but love and determination after her father had died in a mining accident when she was 8. The beads were beautiful, intricate patterns of blue and white, and read that her mother had learned from a Crow woman who had been kind to them during their first harsh winter in Montana Territory. Olivia sold most of what she made to help pay for her room at the boarding house, but she always kept one string for herself, adding to it each week as though building a rosary of remembrance. The bell above the mercantile door chimed, and Olivia looked up from her work to see a tall man entering the shop. He moved with the careful deliberation of someone who spent most of his time outdoors, his shoulders broad beneath a work-worn coat, his hat pulled low over his face. When he lifted his head, she saw weathered features that suggested he was somewhere in his early 30s, with lines around his eyes that spoke of long days squinting into the sun and perhaps longer nights spent alone. "Afternoon," he said, his voice rough as gravel but not unkind. "I am looking for salt and flour, and I will need some coffee if you have got it." "We have all of that," Olivia replied, carefully setting down her beadwork. "How much do you need?" "Enough for one person for about 3 weeks," he said, glancing around the shop with the air of someone who was not accustomed to making conversation. "Maybe a month if I stretch it." As Olivia gathered the supplies, she felt his gaze fall on her beadwork where it lay on the table near the window. She had become protective of those beads, of that connection to her mother, and she tensed slightly, ready to deflect any comments or questions that might feel like intrusions into her grief. "Those are fine," he said quietly, nodding toward the beaded cord. "My mother used to do work like that." Not quite the same pattern, but similar. She passed some years back. Olivia's hand stilled on the sack of flour she had been measuring. There was something in his voice, a hollowness that matched what she heard in her own when she spoke of loss. She looked at him properly then, really looked, and saw past the rough exterior to the loneliness that hung around him like morning fog. "I am sorry," she said, and meant it. "Thank you," he replied, then after a moment added, "I am Yates Irving. I have a ranch about 8 miles north of town. Do not get in much, but I ran out of coffee 3 days ago and I cannot abide another morning without it." "Olivia Dawson," she said, finishing with the flour and moving to wrap the coffee. "I work here most days. Mr. Henderson, who owns the place, lets me keep a corner for my beadwork when it is not busy." "You sell them?" Yates asked, stepping closer to examine the patterns. "Some," Olivia admitted. "They were my mother's designs originally. She passed this winter. I make them to remember her, but I also need to eat, so I sell what I can." Yates nodded slowly, his fingers hovering near but not touching the beads as though he understood they were sacred in their way. "My ranch house is full of empty rooms and silence," he said, speaking almost to himself. "Sometimes I think the quiet will drive me mad. Other times I think it is all I deserve." The words hung between them, raw and unexpected. Olivia found herself wanting to ask why, wanting to understand what had carved such loneliness into this stranger. But the bell chimed again, and two miners came tramping in, loud and demanding, breaking the moment. Yates paid for his supplies without further conversation, though his eyes met Olivia's once more before he left. And in that glance, she saw recognition, as though they had each identified in the other a kindred wounded soul wandering through life without true direction or comfort. She thought about him that evening as she sat in her small room at the boarding house, adding new beads to her mother's string. The pattern was becoming quite long now, nearly long enough to wrap twice around her wrist. Each bead was a day or a memory, blue for the stories her mother told, white for the songs she sang, red for the love that had sustained them through hard times. But as Olivia worked, she found herself wondering about Yates Irving and his empty ranch house, about what losses he carried that made him speak so openly to a stranger about deserving silence. 3 days later, he came back to the mercantile. This time he bought rope and nails, explaining that he was mending fences that had suffered during the winter. Mr. Henderson was away visiting suppliers in Helena, leaving Olivia to manage the shop alone, and perhaps that made it easier for Yates to linger after completing his purchase, to drift back to where she sat with her beadwork. "May I ask you something?" he said, leaning against the counter but maintaining a respectful distance. "You may ask," Olivia replied, continuing to thread beads without looking up, though she was acutely aware of his presence. "What do you do with the memories once you have captured them in beads? Does it make the grief lighter to hold them that way?" The question surprised her with its insight. She paused in her work, considering. "I do not know if grief ever becomes lighter," she said slowly, "but it becomes different. More like something I carry with me rather than something that pins me down. The beads help me feel like she is still here in some way, like I have not lost everything of her." Yates was quiet for a long moment. "I left everything of my mother's exactly as it was when she died," he said finally. "That was 7 years ago. The room is still full of her things, but it does not bring her back. It just makes the house feel haunted. Maybe that is because you are trying to keep her frozen in place instead of letting her become part of your story," Olivia suggested gently. "My mother taught me these patterns so they could live on. I change them sometimes, add my own touches. I think she would like that, knowing her art was growing and traveling rather than sitting still." "I never thought of it that way." Yates straightened, his expression thoughtful. "Would you consider making something for me? I could pay you, of course, something that might help me remember my mother the way you remember yours." Olivia looked up at him then, studying his face. She saw sincerity there and perhaps the beginning of hope. "I could do that," she said. "But I would need to know something about her. The beads have to mean something, not just be pretty colors strung together." And so Yates Irving began to talk, haltingly at first, then with increasing fluency, about a woman named Margaret who had come west with her husband to start a ranch, who had worked as hard as any man to build something lasting, who had loved her only son with fierce devotion and raised him to respect the land and the people on it. He talked about how she had died suddenly of a heart ailment, leaving Yates to manage the ranch alone at 25, and how her death had coincided with the departure of the woman he had planned to marry, who decided she did not want to live on an isolated ranch after all, especially not one shadowed by fresh grief. "So you have been alone there all this time?" Olivia asked when he finished. I have ranch hands who come and go, Yates said, but none who stay. And yes, mostly I have been alone. It is what I am used to now. Used to something does not mean it is good for you, Olivia observed. A ghost of a smile crossed Yates's face. You sound like my mother. She was always practical like that. Then I will make you beads that remind you of practical wisdom, Olivia decided. And of strength, since she clearly had that. Come back in a week and they will be ready. But Yates came back in 3 days, ostensibly to buy tobacco, but really, Olivia suspected, because the ranch house silence had grown too heavy. She had not yet finished his beadwork, but she showed him what she had done so far, explaining her choice of colors. Green for the land his mother had loved, gold for the richness of her legacy, and deep brown for the earth that sustained them all. It is beautiful, Yates said, and his voice carried a thickness that suggested he was genuinely moved. You have a rare gift, Olivia Dawson. It was my mother's gift, she replied automatically, then caught herself. Or it was. I suppose it is mine now too. She would want me to claim it. She would be proud of you, Yates said with certainty. Any mother would be proud of a daughter who honors her memory so well. The words struck something deep inside Olivia, a place that had been cold and dark since her mother's death. Her eyes stung with unexpected tears, and she turned away quickly, not wanting this near stranger to see her cry. But Yates must have noticed anyway, because he said very gently, I am sorry. I did not mean to upset you. You did not, Olivia managed. It is just that no one has said anything like that to me since she died. People in town are kind, but they are ready for me to stop grieving, to move on. You are the first person who seems to understand that remembering is not the same as refusing to live. I do understand, Yates said. Though I will admit, I have done more freezing than living these past years. But talking to you, seeing what you make, it is stirring something, making me think perhaps there is a way forward that does not require forgetting. The mercantile became a kind of way station for them after that, a place where they could meet and talk without the weight of expectation that hung over formal social calls. Yates found reasons to come to town more frequently, and Olivia found herself watching for him, listening for his distinctive tread on the wooden boards outside. They talked about their mothers, yes, but also about books they had read, about the changing seasons, about the small observations that fill a day when you are paying attention. Olivia learned that Yates raised cattle and horses, that he loved the work despite its loneliness, that he had a gift for gentling difficult animals and coaxing life from stubborn soil. Yates learned that Olivia had taught herself to read with unusual proficiency, that she had a quick wit hidden beneath her quiet demeanor, that she dreamed of traveling someday, but felt tied to Montana by her mother's grave. She is not in the grave, Yates said one afternoon as they sat together in the mercantile, him whittling a piece of wood while she worked her beads. Not really. She is in you, in your hands when you work, in your voice when you tell her stories. I know that in my mind, Olivia said. But my heart still feels she is in the cemetery, and I am afraid that if I leave, I will lose her completely. What if you visited her grave before you went anywhere? Yates suggested. Tell her you are going, that you are carrying her with you. Maybe that would help. It was such a simple idea, yet it had never occurred to Olivia. She looked at Yates with new appreciation for the way he seemed to understand the tangled logic of grief. When did you become so wise about these things? I am not wise, he said with a self-deprecating shrug. I am just someone who has spent 7 years learning the wrong ways to handle loss. Maybe that gives me insight into the right ways, though I am still working on applying them myself. Spring deepened into early summer, and with it, something shifted between Olivia and Yates. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. They began to share not just memories of the dead but hopes for the future. Yates admitted that he wanted to expand his ranch, maybe bring in some sheep along with the cattle, but he lacked the motivation to do it alone. Olivia confessed that she wanted to write down her mother's stories, preserve them in words as well as beads, but she feared her writing was not good enough. "I would like to read them," Yates said immediately, "if you ever want to share them." "Perhaps," Olivia said, feeling a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with this man who listened so carefully to everything she said. The beadwork she made for Yates was her finest yet, a band meant to be worn around the wrist, sturdy enough for ranch work but beautiful enough to remind him daily of the artistry and strength his mother had possessed. When she presented it to him, completed at last, he held it in his large, work-roughened hands with such tenderness that Olivia felt her throat tighten. "I cannot thank you enough," he said. "This is more than I asked for, more than I knew I needed." "Wear it well," Olivia replied. "And remember that honoring the past does not mean being trapped by it." Yates fastened the beadwork around his wrist, adjusting it until it sat comfortably. "Will you come see the ranch?" he asked suddenly, looking up at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I know it is not proper for me to ask without a chaperone, but I would like you to see the place I have been talking about. I would like your opinion on some things, and truthfully, I would just like you to be there." The request hung in the air between them, freighted with implications they had both been dancing around for weeks. Olivia knew that accepting would mean acknowledging that this friendship had become something more, that the rancher with his lonely house and she with her grief beads had found in each other a possibility for healing and perhaps even happiness. "I would like that," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But I will tell Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house where I am going, so someone knows." Relief and something warmer flooded Yates's expression. "Of course. Would Sunday suit you? I could come fetch you in the wagon after church services. Sunday would be perfect." The next few days crawled by with excruciating slowness. Olivia found herself nervous in a way she had not been since girlhood, fussing over what to wear and how to arrange her hair. She told herself she was being foolish, that this was simply a visit to see a friend's home, but her heart knew better. Something significant was shifting, some door opening that had been locked since her mother's death. Mrs. Patterson, the boarding house keeper, gave Olivia a knowing look when she mentioned her Sunday plans but said only, "Yates Irving is a good man from what I hear. Keeps to himself mostly but honest and hardworking. Could do a lot worse." "It is not like that," Olivia protested, but her cheeks burned. "If you say so, dear," Mrs. Patterson replied with a small smile. Sunday morning dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for a drive into the countryside. Olivia wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that her mother had helped her make the summer before she died, and braided her dark hair in a crown around her head. She fastened the longest of her beaded strands around her neck, letting it hang down over her bodice like a talisman. Yates arrived promptly after church, driving a well-maintained wagon pulled by two sturdy horses. He had clearly made an effort as well, wearing clean clothes and with his dark hair neatly combed back. When he saw her, his face lit up in a way that made Olivia's nervousness settle into something warmer and more certain. "You look lovely," he said, helping her up onto the wagon seat. "Thank you. You look well yourself." As they drove out of Montana City, the landscape opened up around them in rolling hills covered with new grass and wildflowers. The mountains rose in the distance, still snow-capped, despite the warming weather. Yates pointed out landmarks as they traveled, telling her stories about the land and the people who worked it. His love for this country was evident in every word, and Olivia found herself seeing it through his eyes, understanding why he had chosen to stay despite his loneliness. The Irving ranch was larger than Olivia had imagined, with a sturdy two-story house, a barn, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals. Everything was well maintained, but showed signs of being cared for by one person rather than a full household. As Yates helped her down from the wagon, Olivia felt the significance of being brought here, of being invited into his private world. "Let me show you around," Yates said, and there was a boyish enthusiasm in his voice that made him seem younger, less burdened. He took her first to see the horses, introducing each one by name and personality. Then the cattle grazing in distant pastures, the vegetable garden that he admitted was more weeds than vegetables because he lacked his mother's touch with plants. Finally, they went inside the house. The interior was clean but sparse, with the feeling of a place where someone lived but did not quite thrive. Yates showed her the kitchen, the sitting room with its large fireplace, and then, with some hesitation, led her upstairs to the room he had mentioned, his mother's room, still filled with her possessions. Olivia stepped inside and immediately understood his earlier words about the house feeling haunted. The room was like a shrine, everything in its place but covered in dust, preserved but not alive. She walked slowly around, looking at the items that had meant something to Margaret Irving. A brush and mirror set, a stack of letters tied with ribbon, a wedding photograph, and there, on a shelf, several pieces of beadwork similar to what Olivia made but in different patterns. "These are beautiful," Olivia said, picking up one of the beaded pieces carefully. She was very skilled. She was, Yates agreed, standing in the doorway as though afraid to enter. "I did not know what to do with any of it. Leaving it seemed wrong, but clearing it out seemed worse." Olivia turned to face him, still holding the beadwork. "What if you did neither? What if you took the things that meant the most and incorporated them into the rest of the house, into your life? Let her be part of your home the way my mother is part of my beadwork, present but not frozen." Understanding dawned in Yates's eyes. "Would you help me? I do not think I can do it alone." "Of course." They spent the next several hours going through Margaret Irving's possessions together, with Yates telling stories about various items and Olivia helping him decide what to keep prominently, what to store carefully, and what might be given to others who would appreciate them. It was emotional work, and more than once Yates had to stop, overcome by memory and loss. But Olivia stayed beside him, steady and understanding, offering comfort through her presence and her own hard-won wisdom about grief. By the time they finished, the room looked different, less like a sealed tomb and more like a place that honored memory while acknowledging that life continued. They carried several items downstairs together, finding places for them in the main house. Margaret's favorite shawl draped over a chair in the sitting room, her beadwork displayed on a shelf where it could be seen and admired, her books integrated into the small collection Yates kept by the fireplace. "Thank you," Yates said when they were done, his voice rough with emotion. "I could not have done this without you. I did not even realize how much I needed to do it until you showed me." "We help each other," Olivia said simply. "That is what people do when they understand each other's pain." They ate a simple supper together that Yates prepared, bread and cheese and cold chicken, sitting at the kitchen table as the sun began to set outside. The conversation flowed easily, as it always did between them, but there was a new dimension to it now, a deeper intimacy born of the vulnerable work they had done together. "Olivia," Yates said as they finished eating, "I know this might seem sudden, and I will understand if you need time to think, but I have to say it. These past weeks, getting to know you have been the best time I've had in years." You have brought something back to life in me that I thought was dead and buried with my mother and with the woman who left. I find myself thinking about you constantly, wanting to share everything with you, wanting to know all your thoughts and dreams. I think I am falling in love with you, and I needed you to know. Olivia's heart hammered in her chest. The declaration was everything she had been feeling but had not dared to name. I think I am falling in love with you too, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You have made me feel less alone than I have felt since my mother died. You understand me in ways I did not think anyone could. But Yates, I am frightened. What if we are just two lonely people clinging to each other? What if this is grief talking rather than genuine feeling? Yates reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm around hers. I have asked myself the same questions, he admitted. But here is what I know. Grief brought us together, but it is not what keeps me coming back to town, not what makes me happier than I have been in years. That is you, Olivia, your strength and creativity and kindness. The way you see the world and help me see it differently. I think grief opened a door, but what we found on the other side is real. Tears spilled down Olivia's cheeks, but they were not tears of sadness. I want this to be real, she said. I want to believe we can build something new without betraying the memories we carry. We can, Yates said with certainty. Our mothers loved us. They would want us to be happy, to find joy again. Honoring them does not mean staying stuck in loss. The truth of his words resonated deep in Olivia's chest, releasing something that had been knotted there since winter. She thought of her mother, of the love and laughter they had shared, of the way her mother had always encouraged her to live fully. Her mother would not want her spending her life alone, stringing beads in a corner of someone else's shop. She would want her daughter to thrive, to love, to create a family and a life that carried forward all the good things she had taught her. Then yes, Olivia said, squeezing Yates's hand. Yes, I am falling in love with you, and I want to see where this leads. The smile that broke across Yates's face was like sunrise, transforming him from someone who carried years of sorrow to someone lit from within by hope. He stood, still holding her hand, and drew her up and into his arms. The embrace was gentle at first, tentative, and then Olivia relaxed into it, letting herself feel safe and cherished for the first time in longer than she could remember. When Yates finally kissed her, it was sweet and careful, a question as much as a statement. Olivia kissed him back, answering yes to everything he asked, yes to possibility, yes to a future neither of them had dared to imagine a few months before. The drive back to Montana City. That evening was filled with the comfortable conversation of two people who had found something precious and were still marveling at it. They made plans to see each other again soon, though both knew that soon felt impossibly far away when they had just discovered this connection. In the weeks that followed, Yates came to town every few days, and on Sundays, when Olivia could spare the time, he took her back to the ranch. With each visit, the house felt more alive, and Yates seemed lighter, as though the weight he had carried for years was finally lifting. They worked together on small projects, reviving the vegetable garden, organizing the barn, repairing fence lines. Olivia brought her beadwork and sat on the porch while Yates did his evening chores, the domestic scene feeling natural and right. The people of Montana City began to notice, of course. Small towns thrived on such observations. Mrs. Patterson gave Olivia increasingly obvious looks of approval. The other women at church started including Olivia in conversations about housekeeping and cooking, as though preparing her for a role everyone could see coming. Even Mr. Henderson, the mercantile owner, made comments about how Yates Irving was finally coming out of his shell. "It is good to see," he told Olivia one afternoon. "That man has been alone too long. "You are good for him, Miss Dawson, and unless I miss my guess, he is good for you too." Olivia could not deny it. She felt transformed, not because Yates had rescued her from grief, but because together they had found a way through it and out the other side. She still made her beaded pieces for her mother, but now she also made them for joy, for beauty's sake, for the pleasure of creation rather than solely as an act of remembrance. And Yates, who had locked himself away from life, was learning to open up again, to trust in happiness, to believe that love could return after loss. It was late summer when Yates proposed, on a Sunday evening as they sat on his porch watching the sun set over the mountains. He had been quieter than usual all day, and Olivia had sensed something building in him, some question he was working up the courage to ask. "Olivia," he said finally, taking both her hands in his. "I know we have not been courting very long by conventional standards, but I am 32 years old and you are 23, and neither of us is a child who needs years to know our own hearts. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. I love your strength and your gentleness, your creativity and your wisdom. I love the way you have brought life back into this house and into me. I cannot imagine my future without you in it. Will you marry me? Will you make this ranch truly a home?" Olivia felt joy rise in her like water from a well, pure and sustaining. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, Yates Irving. I love you too, and I want to build a life with you here." Yates pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. "She would want you to have this," he said. "And I want you to have it because you helped me honor her memory properly, helped me understand how to keep her with me while still moving forward." Olivia let him slide the ring onto her finger, tears streaming down her face. Then they were kissing, holding each other as the sky blazed orange and pink and purple above them, as the ranch land stretched out in peaceful silence around them, as the future they would share together became real and solid and certain. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Montana City. It was a simple ceremony attended by the townspeople who had come to care for both of them, and Olivia wore the beaded necklace she had made for her mother, while Yates wore the wrist cuff Olivia had created for him. Before the wedding, Olivia had visited her mother's grave as Yates had once suggested, telling her mother about Yates and the ranch and the happiness she had found, asking for her blessing even though she knew in her heart it had already been given. When they exchanged vows, Olivia felt a sense of rightness settle over her like a benediction. This was what her mother had wanted for her, what life was supposed to be. Not an endless winter of grief, but a progression through seasons, from loss to healing to new growth. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up outside and food contributed by various neighbors who were glad to see the Irving place hosting a celebration again. People danced and laughed and toasted the new couple, and as Olivia watched Yates interact with the community, she saw how much more comfortable he had become, how much less isolated he seemed now that he had let someone in. As evening fell and the guests began to depart, Yates and Olivia stood together on the porch, watching the last of the wagons roll away into the twilight. "Are you happy?" Yates asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought I would be again," Olivia replied honestly. "Are you?" "Completely," he said, kissing the top of her head. "Welcome home, Olivia Irving." The name felt strange and wonderful on her ears. Olivia Irving. She was no longer Olivia Dawson, alone in the world, stringing beads to hold onto a memory. She was part of something new now, a partnership built on mutual understanding and love, a future that honored the past without being imprisoned by it. Their first months of marriage were ones of adjustment and discovery. Olivia learned the rhythms of ranch life, how to help with the animals, how to manage the household, how to stretch supplies and plan for the harsh winter ahead. Yates learned to share his space and his thoughts, to trust in the permanence of this new happiness, to believe that Olivia would not leave him the way his first love had. They talked often and deeply about their fears and hopes, about the mundane details of daily life and the profound questions of existence. Olivia continued her beadwork, now teaching Yates the patterns her mother had taught her, and together they created new designs that blended both their mother's traditions. The house filled with these pieces, each one a marker of their joined lives, of memories honored and new memories being made. When winter came, harsh and cold as Montana winters always were, Olivia and Yates faced it together, reading by the fire in the evenings, sharing meals at the kitchen table, lying together in the darkness and talking until sleep claimed them. The loneliness that had defined both their lives for so long was gone, replaced by companionship and love. In the spring, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and a measure of trepidation. Yates worried about being a good father after so many years alone, about whether he remembered how to be part of a family. Olivia worried about childbirth, about whether she would be a good mother, about the responsibilities that came with bringing new life into the world. But they helped each other through the fears, as they had helped each other through grief. Yates was attentive and tender throughout Olivia's pregnancy, taking on extra work around the house and insisting she rest more than she thought necessary. Olivia made tiny beaded bracelets for the baby, pouring all her love and hope into each small bead, praying that this child would know the kind of love she had received from her own mother. Their son was born in early winter, healthy and loud and perfect. They named him Thomas after Olivia's father, giving him Yates as a middle name to carry on his own family line. Holding his son for the first time, Yates wept openly, overwhelmed by the miracle of this new life, this proof that the future was real and good and full of possibility. Olivia recovered well from the birth, and as she nursed little Thomas, she often thought of her mother, wishing she could be there to see her grandson but feeling somehow that she was present anyway. In the patterns Olivia used when she sewed his clothes, in the lullabies she sang that her mother had sung to her, in the beaded strands she hung over his cradle for protection and blessing. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Yates expanded his herds as he had talked about doing, and Olivia's beadwork became well known enough that she received orders from as far away as Helena. They hired a ranch hand, a young man named Samuel, who proved reliable and hardworking, easing some of the burden on Yates and giving him more time to spend with his family. Life was not without its challenges. There were years when the cattle prices fell, when drought threatened, when illness swept through the herds. Thomas proved to be a spirited child, curious and stubborn, requiring patience and creativity to manage. But Yates and Olivia faced everything together, their partnership strengthened by each obstacle they overcame. When Thomas was 3, Olivia became pregnant again, and this time she felt less afraid, more confident in her ability to mother, more certain of the life they had built. Their second child was a daughter, born easily on a warm summer evening. They named her Margaret Josephine, Margaret for Yates's mother and Josephine for Olivia's mother, ensuring that both grandmothers would be remembered and honored. Little Maggie, as they called her, was a calmer child than Thomas had been, content to sit quietly and watch the world around her. As she grew, she showed an early interest in beadwork, and Olivia's heart swelled with joy at the thought of passing her mother's craft to yet another generation. The years rolled on, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their children's growth. Thomas learned to ride and to help with the ranch work, showing his father's affinity for animals and land. Maggie learned to string beads and to create the intricate patterns that had defined her grandmother's and mother's art, adding her own innovations as Olivia had done. Yates and Olivia's love deepened with time, becoming less the passionate intensity of new romance and more the steady, sustaining force of true partnership. They knew each other's rhythms and moods, could communicate with a glance, work together with the efficiency of long practice. The loneliness that had once defined them both seemed like something from another life, a distant memory of people they used to be. On their 10th anniversary, Yates gave Olivia an extraordinary gift, a beading table he had crafted himself, with special compartments for different colored beads and a smooth surface perfect for detailed work. Olivia was moved to tears by the thoughtfulness of it, by the way it showed how completely he understood and supported her art. "You have given me so much," she said, running her hands over the polished wood. "You have given me a home and a family and a reason to create beauty instead of just holding on to sorrow." "You gave me the same," Yates replied, pulling her into his arms. "You gave me life again when I thought I was just existing. You made me remember how to hope and love and believe in tomorrow." As they stood together in the parlor of their ranch house, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built, Olivia thought about the woman she had been when they first met, sitting alone in the mercantile stringing beads for her dead mother's memory. She thought about Yates as he had been then, locked in loneliness and grief, unable to move forward or let go. They had both been broken in their ways, both lost in the wilderness of loss. But they had found each other, and in finding each other, they had found a way to honor their dead while embracing life. The beads Olivia still made carried her mother's memory, yes, but they also carried joy and creativity, and the ongoing story of a life fully lived. More years passed, bringing more changes. Thomas grew into a capable young man who took on increasing responsibility for the ranch, eventually marrying a practical woman from a neighboring ranch and building a house on the Irving property to start his own family. Maggie became known throughout Montana Territory for her exceptional beadwork, selling pieces to wealthy clients and teaching the craft to other young women who wanted to learn. Yates and Olivia grew older together, their hair silvering, their bodies bearing the marks of years of hard work, but their love undiminished. They became grandparents, delighting in Thomas's children and eventually Maggie's as well when she married a schoolteacher from Montana City and started a family of her own. The ranch house that had once felt haunted and empty was now perpetually full of life, with children running through the rooms, with laughter and conversations and the clatter of family meals. The beadwork that Olivia made, and that her daughter and granddaughters made, decorated every room, each piece telling a story, each one a connection between past and present and future. On a summer evening when Yates was 62 and Olivia was 53, they sat together on the porch as they had done thousands of times before, watching the sun set over the mountains that had witnessed their entire life together. Their children were grown and independent, their grandchildren thriving, their ranch prosperous and well-managed. "You ever think about how we met?" Olivia asked, her hand in Yates's as it had been for so many years. "Often," Yates admitted. "I think about how lucky I was that I ran out of coffee that spring, that I walked into the mercantile on a day when you were sitting by the window with your beads. I think about how close I came to never meeting you, to spending my whole life alone in that empty house." "I think about it too," Olivia said, "about how grief brought us together but love kept us together, about how the worst thing that happened to each of us somehow led to the best thing." "Your mother and mine would be pleased, I think," Yates said, "to see what we have built, how we have honored them while creating something new. Olivia looked down at the beaded strand she wore around her neck, the original piece she had been working on when they met, now supplemented by beads added over the years to mark important moments. Their wedding, the birth of each child, the milestones of their shared life. It had become something different from what she had originally intended, not just a memorial but a celebration, a chronicle of a life lived fully despite loss. They would be very pleased, she agreed. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Yates and Olivia sat in comfortable silence, their lives woven together as intricately as any beadwork, each moment and memory a bead strung on the cord of their shared history. They had both come to this ranch carrying grief and loneliness, but they had built here something lasting and good, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. The beads Olivia had strung for her mother's memory had led her to a rancher who gave her new memories, better memories, memories full of love and laughter, and the rich complexity of a life well lived. And in the end, that was the greatest honor she could offer her mother, not to stay frozen in loss, but to take the lessons and love she had been given and use them to create beauty and meaning and family. The Montana wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the sounds of cattle and horses, of children playing in the distance, of a full and vibrant life. The ranch that had once been a prison of loneliness had become a home, and the woman who had strung beads alone had become a wife, mother, grandmother, artist, and partner in a love story that had healed them both. Thomas found them there later that evening, still sitting together on the porch, and smiled at the sight. His parents had taught him by example what love looked like, how it sustained through hard times, how it grew deeper rather than dimmer with the passage of years. He hoped to give his own children the same gift they had given him. A home full of love, a family built on mutual support, and the knowledge that grief did not have to be the end of the story. As Yates and Olivia finally rose to go inside, their hands still clasped, they took one last look at the land stretched out before them in the gathering darkness. This place had seen their sorrows and their joys, had been witness to their transformation from lonely individuals to partners, to parents, to grandparents. It had been the setting for the most important chapters of their lives, and it would continue to hold their story long after they were gone, just as the beads Olivia made would continue to carry their memories forward into the future. Inside the house, Olivia lit the lamps while Yates banked the fire for the night. They moved around each other with the ease of long familiarity, performing the small rituals of ending the day that they had performed together for nearly 30 years. When they finally climbed the stairs to their bedroom, they were both tired but content, filled with the quiet satisfaction that comes from a day well spent, a life well lived. Before she slept, Olivia added one more bead to her strand, a deep blue one that represented this perfect summer evening, this moment of peace and reflection. Then she set her beadwork aside and turned to her husband, who was already waiting for her with open arms. "I love you," she said, as she had said countless times before and would say countless times again. "I love you too," Yates replied, pulling her close. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for saving me." "We saved each other," Olivia corrected gently. "That is what love does." And as they drifted off to sleep together, the beads Olivia had strung lay on the bedside table, catching the moonlight that filtered through the window, each one holding a memory, each one telling a story, each one a testament to the healing power of love and the importance of honoring the past while embracing the future. The years continued to pass with gentle inevitability. Yates and Olivia aged gracefully, their bodies slowing but their minds and hearts remaining sharp and full of love. They watched their grandchildren grow and begin to have children of their own, extending the family line and the traditions they had worked so hard to preserve and adapt. Olivia taught her granddaughters the beadwork patterns her mother had taught her, but she also encouraged them to experiment, to add their own touches, to make the craft their own. The beading had come full circle, from her mother to her daughter, to her granddaughters, each generation adding something new while respecting what came before. Yates remained active on the ranch as long as he was able, teaching his grandsons the skills his mother had taught him about working the land and caring for animals. He passed on not just practical knowledge but also values: honesty, hard work, respect for the earth and all living things, and above all, the importance of family and love. One spring afternoon, when the first wildflowers were beginning to bloom across the Montana hills, Olivia and Yates celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. Their children organized a large gathering at the ranch, with extended family and friends coming from miles around to honor the couple whose love story had become something of a legend in the community. As Olivia looked around at the crowd of people filling their home and yard, at the faces of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who existed because she and Yates had found each other in that mercantile so many years ago, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. The loneliness and grief that had once defined her seemed like they belonged to someone else, to a different Olivia who had lived in a different lifetime. During the celebration, Maggie presented her parents with a special gift: an enormous beaded tapestry she had created over the past year, depicting the Irving Ranch in exquisite detail. Every building, every tree, every feature of the landscape they loved was represented in tiny glass beads, the work so intricate and beautiful that it took Olivia's breath away. "It is your legacy," Maggie said as her mother examined the piece with tears streaming down her face. "Everything you and Papa built, everything you have given us, all captured in the art you taught me. I wanted you to see what we see when we look at this place and at your life together." Yates stood beside Olivia, his own eyes wet, one arm around his wife and the other around his daughter. "It is magnificent," he managed to say. "More beautiful than anything I could have imagined." The tapestry was hung in the parlor, where it could be seen and admired by everyone who entered the house. It became the centerpiece of the room, a constant reminder of everything that could be built from love and determination, of how two broken people could come together and create something whole and lasting. As the sun began to set on their anniversary celebration, and the guests started to leave, Yates and Olivia found themselves once again on their porch, in the spot that had become sacred to them over the years. They watched their family loading up wagons and saying goodbyes, watched the ranch settle back into its evening quiet. 40 years, Olivia mused. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like we just met yesterday. "I know exactly what you mean," Yates said. "But I am grateful for every single day, every moment we have had together. You made me believe in happiness again when I thought it was lost to me forever. And you gave me a reason to stop just surviving and start truly living," Olivia replied. "The beads I strung for my mother led me to you, and you gave me a whole life's worth of new memories to string beads for. Though now, I suppose our grandchildren will be stringing beads for our memory someday." "That is as it should be," Yates said peacefully. "The circle continuing, the love and the stories passing on. We have done well, Olivia. We have built something that will last." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, neither needing to speak to communicate the depth of their feelings. Their hands were clasped together, as they had been countless times before, two lives so thoroughly intertwined that they could no longer imagine being separate. The Montana night settled around them, vast and beautiful, full of the sounds and smells they had known for so many years. In the distance, cattle lowed softly. Closer to the house, the horses stirred in their stalls. From the direction of Thomas's house came the faint sound of children laughing as they got ready for bed. It was perfect, Olivia thought. Not perfect in the sense of being without problems or challenges, but perfect in the way that a life fully lived was perfect, complete in its imperfections, rich in its complexity. When they finally went inside that night, climbing the stairs slowly together, they passed by the beaded tapestry Maggie had made. Olivia paused to touch it gently, running her fingers over the tiny beads that represented their home. "Do you remember what I told you the first time you asked me to make something for you?" she asked Yates. "I said the beads had to mean something, not just be pretty colors strung together." "I remember," Yates said. "Every bead in that piece means something," Olivia said, gesturing to the tapestry. "Every tiny glass bead represents a memory, a moment, a piece of the life we have built. And when I am gone, when we are both gone, people will still be able to look at this and know that we were here, that we loved, that we created something beautiful out of loss and loneliness. That is immortality enough for me," Yates said, drawing her close. "To be remembered in beads and stories, to have our love live on in our children and grandchildren, to know that we took the broken pieces of our lives and made something whole." They continued up to their room, both feeling the weight of years but also the lightness of hearts at peace. As they settled into bed, Olivia picked up her current beadwork, a simple strand she was making for her newest great-grandchild. Her fingers moved with practiced ease, threading bead after bead onto the leather cord. Yates watched her work with the same fascination he had felt that first day in the mercantile, amazed by the skill and artistry in her hands. "You are still beautiful," he said softly. "More beautiful now than you were at 23 because now I know the full depth of your heart and spirit." Olivia looked up from her work, her eyes shining. "And you are still the lonely rancher who walked into my life and changed everything, except now you are not lonely anymore. We neither of us are." "No," Yates agreed. "We are not lonely anymore." She set aside her beadwork and turned to him, and they held each other in the darkness. Two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, exactly when they needed it. The beads Olivia had strung for her dead mother's memory had indeed led her to new memories, beautiful memories, memories of a love that had healed and sustained them through 40 years, and would continue to sustain them for whatever time they had left. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the night, carrying their story across the ranch lands, a story of loss transformed into love, of loneliness becoming partnership, of two people who had honored their pasts while building a future together. It was a story worth telling, worth preserving, worth stringing into beads so that future generations would know that even in the hardest times, even in the deepest grief, love could find a way to bloom again. And in the quiet of their bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived, Yates and Olivia Irving fell asleep in each other's arms, content in the knowledge that they had found their happily ever after, not despite their losses, but because of what those losses had taught them about the value of love, the importance of memory, and the necessity of moving forward while carrying the best of the past with them always.